the future of us. Because, to be perfectly honest, the future is nothing more than a combination of the decisions that we make together, me and you. We had, in Indian history in days gone by, rishis. The word rishi means seer, people who look and try and understand something. And they used to disappear in mountain retreats and caves and meditate on this particular issue. The future, me and you, and how we interact to bring that future about. They made some amazing discoveries. And those discoveries were accumulated over a period of some 10,000 years. And I'd like to just share with you a quotation which is one of my favourite ones. Each day I believe less and less in the social question and in the political question and in the moral question and in all other questions that people have invented, in order that they shall not have to face resolutely the only question that exists, the human question. So in my tradition, the accumulated knowledge of all of those rishis sitting in their mountain caves for decades and millennia, it's been written down and stored. We have 4 Vedas, which are 20,337 verses. We have the Mahabharata, 200,000 plus lines, 1.8 million words. The Ramayana, 24,000 verses. Yoga scriptures, there are lots of yoga scriptures. We have the Puranas and the Upanishads. And all of those scriptures are focused on one particular manifestation, and that is you. What is it that we actually are? It's all about you. And what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is to try and consolidate and wring the essence and to try and share it with you so that when you leave, you have got all of the essence of our ancient scriptures. So this you, the rishis sitting in their mountain retreats, they became aware that a human being passes through 4 different stages. There are 4 types of human being, and the most basic human being is actually characterized by a simple phenomenon. They don't know who they are, they don't know what their purpose is, but the key factor is that they don't know that they don't know. So this is a character who is confident, determined to make success, to defeat others, to accumulate wealth, to satisfy all of their desires. And this sort of a character is a very base, animalistic human being. In one of those scriptures that I mentioned, the Gita, it describes this person as having the following characteristics: hypocrisy, arrogance, harshness and ignorance, to satisfy their desires, their goals. Today I've acquired this, tomorrow I'm going to acquire that. Today I've defeated him, tomorrow I'm going to defeat someone else. So that's the nature of the basest human personality. We have the next level, who know that they don't know. They have no idea of their purpose. They're confused and dissatisfied. They have now come to understand that there is something that they still don't know. They've built their empires, but inside of them there is still some sort of a discontent. Something is missing. And then all of a sudden they start to become confused and start to seek that. So at this level, they don't know their purpose, but at least they know that they don't know. Now these people know their purpose. They know their purpose, but they don't know that they know. So after having been in the lower 2 levels, they've now gotten to that stage. It's time for a midlife crisis. All the old formulae are not working. The body needs repairing. The mind is not tranquil. All of the old ideas and everything they'd learned hasn't given them what they were actually hoping for. So now they've gotten to that point where they're actually discarding all of the old ideas and following intuition. They're becoming more natural. They're reconnecting with a deeper sense of existence. But they actually don't know that that's what they're doing yet. Now, this stage of a human being is extraordinary in that not only do they know their purpose, but they know that they know their purpose. They have now experimented, or they've acquired wisdom, they know what they're here for, and they're actually fulfilling that purpose. The lowest level is typified by a possessive, aggressive person. The next one is confusion and dissatisfaction, tranquility and innocence, as in children. Children have a natural sense of intuition. They have a natural desire to be harmonious, to live in comfort, warmth, and with affection. And we have a symbol which typifies the blissful person. And that picture of Shiva, which has become very common these days as a god, it's actually symbolism for a person who has mastered rage and anger, a person who has mastered lust, a person who has mastered the auto-reactions that we have. If somebody shouts at you and says something unpleasant, how quickly we shout back. They've mastered those actions. If somebody pushes you in a hallway, how quickly we respond physically. Those auto-response mechanisms have also been brought under control. So that Shiva image is actually of a tranquil person who is self-possessed, who has mastered his body and mastered his mind. So this is the pyramid that our ancestors have depicted for us. Now we put forward the proposition that every human being is born actually at level 3. They know their purpose, but they don't know that they know their purpose. They're guided purely by intuition. They're guided purely by wanting to be loved and to give love. They're guided by curiosity. If you have if you peruse on that idea, you come to a possible understanding that all creatures are actually created at that level. Every single creature follows intuition. If you think of a bumblebee knows that it's going to go out there and collect nectar and bring it back. It's not taught that, it knows that, it's intuition. And so we put forward the understanding that actually every human being is born tranquil and innocent. They know their purpose, but they don't know that they know. A genuine education system, from our perspective, is one which would take that person and teach them about themselves. It would teach them how to master their body. It would teach them how to master their mind. It would teach them to understand what it is that they are actually experiencing in being an incarnate human being. This teaching would immediately take them up to the next level, because there is one extraordinary phenomenon that happens. Do people practice yoga here? So we have one or two. So the first thing that happens when you start to practice yoga at the physical level is you know your body intimately. You start to become very, very familiar with how it works. And the more familiar you become with your own body, suddenly you become familiar with everybody else's body. Because you realize that the challenges that you have been overcoming in making this body do what you want it to do and to behave are the challenges that everybody is facing. The next thing is that once meditation is started, you start to navigate your mind. You become familiar with the tricks that your mind plays. And in doing so, you connect with everybody else's mind, and you see that they too are working through the same challenges. So this teaching takes a person from being just an individual to actually being connected in a very holistic and a healthy and positive manner with every other human being. So this is an option that's available to us. This is a choice in terms of an education system, but there is a second choice as well. And that second choice is this. The Greek root word for education actually means to draw out from within. So there is an understanding that innate inside of us there is something wanting to be expressed, something unique that we want to bring into this particular world. And unless we understand that to be the case, another type of education occurs. And another type of education is one which actually changes the nature of your existence and your understanding. It's one which takes you from being tranquil and innocent to actually becoming confused, dissatisfied. And an observation was made by a scholar where he said in the West, the education system that we're labouring under now is becoming very close to this, and that the phenomenon of teenage rebellion is actually that inner child which has been taken from being tranquil and innocent through confusion and dissatisfaction, and its last rebellious act in its teenage years as it drops to the lowest level is, no, I don't want this anymore. But more often than not, the early 20s are the time when we actually give up those struggles and those inner voices, and we become part of the lower level, which is the pursuit of material desires and the pursuit of control and fear and everything else. We then come to, in our tradition, a journey. And each and every person, once they have spent a little bit of time at the bottom and become basically disgruntled and dissatisfied with it, they then start on their journey all the way back upwards. And that journey, the science of how to do that, and the science of is the science of what we call yoga, union, becoming connected. If you recall what I said about becoming connected to your own body, suddenly connects you to everybody else. Becoming connected to your own mind suddenly connects you to everybody else's mind. As your journey progresses, then the me and the I that is actually experiencing life transforms into something with not so many boundaries. So we understood that a society and a family, a company, a department is nothing more than the sum total of all of the individuals, all of the me's when they work together. They actually themselves create an identity. And so we have two, on my screen here, I have two profiles of society. The first one on the left is actually the one where at the top we have all of these blissful connected people who are actually not, they're not aggressive, they're not dominating, they're not into consumption. They're actually very much more connected to everybody else's feelings and needs as well. And if those people are at the top, then what they will do is they will help everybody else to come and rise up to that highest level. At the other extreme, we have a society where it's inverted, where the dominance is actually with people from the lowest level, who are very aggressive, who are demanding of resources, who are fearful, and so they control more. They are actually experienced junkies from the sense of wanting to eat more, wanting to see more, wanting to consume more. And the two are polar opposites, and humanity has always oscillated and varied. So there are some rises, some changes, and you can perhaps even do it as an exercise for yourselves to consider where it is that your society is and where it is that your community is at this moment in time. But the key question is, who is in control? Now that you know the sort of profiles that are involved, which group is in control? Because the people who are in control, they determine the future. So there are two ways of making decisions. One is on the basis of profit and loss. Does this profit me or do I lose by doing this? The other is a slightly different way of making decisions. Instead of trying to analyse and project forward and plan and create a scheme, we adopted a slightly different approach, which was no matter what the decision, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the choice, the decision that we would make had to fit these particular profiles. One is non-violence. Mahatma Gandhi made the whole philosophy of non-violence very, very famous. So, does the action increase or decrease violence? Does it prevent violence or does it lead to violence? Is it based in reality, i.e. certain experiential knowledge, or is it based in belief? Exuberance. Exuberance is that explosive experience of being alive. When you look at something like a rose, the first spring of rose, you will see an explosion of red energy emerging from that rose. That's exuberance. Who has seen the Indian festival of Holi, the festival of colours? That's exuberance. So the action that you're making, the choice that you're making, the decision that you're going to be making, does it lead to an exuberant existence? And finally, harmony. We have this notion that all of the units work together to increase every unit's experience of an exuberant existence. So when you're faced with a decision, we decided to take the approach that actually, forget the outcome. The outcome is unpredictable. There are too many variables in this space for you to make a regular judgment. We're trained to use our left hemisphere to make calculations and to make judgments. But frankly speaking, as any mathematician here will know, unless you know all the variables, and unless you know all the relationships between the variables, the decision that you make is flawed. If there is one variable or one relationship that you're not aware of, the conclusion is meaningless, it's invalid. And therefore, if you don't know all the variables, yes and no are equally suspect. Now, if you have the courage to experiment on that with your life, you will find it a very interesting time. And there was one year when I was getting through these stages where I made that choice at the beginning of the year. I decided, for the next 12 months, I'm going to say yes to everything. I'm not going to tell anybody at all about my choice, but no matter what it is, I'm going to say yes to it because I understood that yes and no were actually not within my control to understand. Extraordinary events happened. I ended up, somebody in Spain phoned me and said, Satish, I would like to sell you something. It's by the sea, it accommodates 4 people, and you'll really have a good time. So I had to say yes, and I ended up buying one of those drug runners boats. So I had no idea what it was until I got there 6 months later, and it was exactly that. 2 massive engines, and as you can tell from me, I don't even have a sports car. But my sons had an absolutely wonderful summer that summer. And that was the impact of making these sorts of decisions. It becomes uncertain, but you develop courage and you develop a degree of excitement in how to be a human being, and in your existence unfolds in front of you. But just consider, if you're making choices on the basis of those principles as opposed to loyalty, most of us make choices on the basis of profit and loss, gain or benefit, and loyalty. Who are we loyal to? But if you're not making choices using that calculation, then all of a sudden, so many boundaries disappear. There is no such thing as a left wing or a right wing. It doesn't make sense to a person who has moved into that space. They all disappear. The future becomes very, very difficult to predict. But that future is a lot more exciting, and it's a lot more intuitive, and it's a lot more in tune with the whole of human existence and indeed the earth. So it's a question of choices. How do you choose to make these decisions? We have a choice. We can make the decisions and become one of lots of little individual units, scrabbling around on the surface of this earth, trying to grasp a little bit of safety, to become secure, to look after people who we think are our people. Or we have the alternative, and the alternative was actually really well articulated by a famous historian called Toynbee, who, if he'd said this in this day and age, would have a slightly different reaction. But what he said was, it's already becoming clear that a chapter which had a Western beginning will have to have an Indian ending if it's not to end in the self-destruction of the human race. At this supremely dangerous moment in time, the only way of salvation is the Indian way. And what he was referring to is a glimpse of it I've given to you. The Indian way is actually to make choices on the basis of those principles as opposed to on the basis of our calculations. And so I went to the Houses of Parliament, and this particular Home Secretary, he had his office tucked away in one of those little towers. And so I sat there in this little office, and he said, "Satish, tell me something." He said, "Why is it that we have so few Hindus who are radicalized? Why is it that this is a phenomenon? We have so few who are actually engaging in violent acts." And I had no answer for him. When you ask a person, why is it you're healthy, you can't find an answer to why it is that you're that way. If you ask a person, why is it that you're ill, then you can have an understanding. And we would suggest that following those principles takes a person to a place where, because boundaries disappear, healing is so much easier. You get to a stage where you can actually see that the breath that leaves one person is entering another person. The air that's moving around is actually moving around through all of us. Each and every one of you has been communicating with me through your clothing, through your gestures, through your eyes. Some of the words that I've been saying, they will become part of you. When you leave this space, none of us will be the same people who we were when we walked in. Those boundaries are actually they're a false understanding that we have. And as those boundaries disappear, the notion of me starts to expand. So my conclusion was that I would suggest to you that the notion of me which will bring us to a good future is actually, how far are you willing to allow your boundaries to expand? Are you able to become a much bigger me, so much so that every decision you make is a decision as though the whole planet was making that decision? And I think that's an idea worth sharing. Thank you very much for your time.